Separation of air traffic. Vertical is by assigning different levels. Horizontal may be longitudinal expressed as distance or time, or lateral, flying different routes or over different geographical areas. Composite is a combination of vertical and one of the other forms of separation. Separation based on time. Aircraft same level, same track. Generally 15 minutes, or reduced to 10 minutes with nav aids. If the aircraft ahead is 20 knots faster, then 5 minutes. If the aircraft ahead is 40 knots faster, then 3 minutes. Aircraft climbing or descending on the same track. Generally 15 minutes. 10 minutes with nav aids, or 5 minutes with an exact reporting point scenario. Aircraft same level crossing tracks. Generally 15 minutes, or 10 minutes with nav aids. Aircraft climbing, descending, crossing tracks. 15 minutes, or 10 minutes with nav aids. Separation based by distance. For aircraft on the same level and the same track, generally it's 20 nautical miles. Or it's reduced to 10 nautical miles if the aircraft ahead is travelling 20 knots faster. Aircraft climbing or descending on the same track is 10 nautical miles. Aircraft on the same level crossing tracks is 20 nautical miles. And aircraft climbing or descending crossing tracks, there is actually nothing specified. For area navigation, it's 80 nautical miles for everything. ICAO prescribed separation minima. ICAO minima are detailed in PANS ATM Doc All 4s. They are defined for aircraft under ATC control which have not reported the preceding aircraft in sight and have been instructed to follow and maintain their own separation from that aircraft visually. If the latter occurs in the case of an IFR aircraft, then the pilot in command of the aircraft concerned becomes responsible for ensuring that the spacing from a preceding aircraft of a heavier weight turbulence category is acceptable. The distance between two aircraft on arrival or departure is used where radar separation of traffic is being applied, and the time between the successive passage of two aircraft at a point is used where procedural separation applies. Since relatively few airports routinely use radar separation for takeoff and initial climb, the practical effect of this distinction on IFR traffic is that weight turbulence separations between arriving aircraft are based upon distance, and those between departing aircraft are by time interval, at rotation, since this is where weight vortices begin. Minimum time separation, intermediate takeoff after a full-length takeoff. Minimum time separation for departing aircraft which are using an intermediate part of the same runway or an intermediate part of a parallel runway separated by less than 760 meters is 3 minutes between a light or medium aircraft when taking off behind a heavy aircraft and a light aircraft when taking off behind a medium aircraft. Minimum time separation for mixed arrival departure use with a displaced threshold. Additional minimum time separations apply if the runway involved has a displaced landing threshold. In this case, separation minimum for runways with successive arriving departing or departing arriving traffic is a minimum of 2 minutes between a light or medium aircraft and a heavy aircraft, and between a light aircraft and a medium aircraft if an arriving light or medium aircraft follows a departing heavy aircraft, or an arriving light aircraft follows a departing medium aircraft, or a departing light or medium aircraft follows an arriving heavy aircraft, or a departing light aircraft follows an arriving medium aircraft, and if the projected flight paths are expected to cross. Minimum time separation, opposite direction use by successive aircraft. A separation minimum of 2 minutes is required between a light or medium aircraft and a heavy aircraft, and between a light aircraft and a medium aircraft when the heavier aircraft is making a low or missed approach and the lighter aircraft is using an opposite direction runway for takeoff, or landing on the same runway in the opposite direction, or landing on a parallel opposite direction runway separated by less than 760 meters. Helicopters. Helicopters are also susceptible to the effects of wake turbulence from large fixed-wing aircraft, and the separation requirements apply equally to helicopters as well as fixed-wing aircraft. No specific separation minima are considered necessary for helicopters because of the way they operate in relation to fixed-wing aircraft. Helicopters also produce tip vortices when in flight. In forward flight, the downwash from the main rotor is transformed into a pair of trailing vortices, comparable to the wingtip vortices generated by a fixed-wing aircraft. And there is some evidence that for a given maximum takeoff mass, these vortices are more intense than those from a similar weight fixed-wing aircraft. It is therefore recommended that helicopters should be operated well clear of light aircraft when hovering or whilst air taxiing. Minimum distances apply whenever an aircraft directly follows another at the same altitude or less than 1,000 feet below it, or if both aircraft are using the same runway or parallel runways separated by less than 760 meters, or an aircraft is crossing behind an aircraft at the same altitude of less than 1,000 feet below. If a heavy aircraft is following heavy, the minimum separation is 4 nautical miles. Medium following heavy is 5 nautical miles, light following heavy 6 nautical miles, and light following medium 5 nautical miles. Minimum time separation for successive landings or full-length takeoffs. Minimum time separation for arriving aircraft not radar separated is 2 minutes for a medium aircraft behind a heavy aircraft, and 3 minutes for a light aircraft behind a heavy or medium aircraft. Minimum time separation for departing aircraft which are using the same runway or parallel runways separated by less than 760 meters, or crossing runways if the projected flight path of the second aircraft will cross the projected flight path of the first aircraft at the same altitude or less than 1,000 feet below, or parallel runways separated by 760 meters or more. If the projected flight path of the second aircraft will cross the projected flight path of the first aircraft at the same altitude or less than 1,000 feet below, it's 2 minutes between a light or medium aircraft taking off behind a heavy aircraft and a light aircraft taking off behind a medium aircraft. Approach control service. Minimum separation between departing aircraft. 1 minute for aircraft on tracks diverging by at least 45 degrees immediately after takeoff. 2 minutes if the preceding aircraft is travelling 40 knots faster than the following aircraft and both follow the same track. Significant changes in surface wind velocity are to be reported if the headwind component changes by 10 knots, the tailwind by 2 knots, and the crosswind by 5 knots. The criterion used to determine level occupancy is plus or minus 300 feet, but this may be reduced to not less than 200 feet. Speed control may be used up to 4 nautical miles from the threshold on final approach. The maximum speed adjustment is 20 knots.